Morning. Happy Saturday. I just thought I'd move on to chapter 21 for those of you who are eager to finish the book. We have three left. And I just wanted to lead you in a loving kindness meditation for those of you who are feeling a little anxious. So take a comfortable cross legged seat. Try to feel your sits bones rooted to the earth. Your crown of the head rises towards the sky. Just settling in. And maybe you want to take a heart mudra. So you take your right hand over your heart and then your left hand over your right hand. Close your eyes. Just feel your heart beating against your palms. And here's the meditation. Just try to picture it as I read it to you. May I be free from inner and outer harm and danger. May I be safe and protected. May I be free of mental suffering or distress. May I be happy. May I be free of physical pain and suffering. May I be healthy and strong. May I be able to live in this world happily, peacefully, joyfully, and with ease. May all beings be safe, happy, healthy, live joyously. May all living beings be safe, happy, healthy, and live joyously. May all breathing beings be safe, happy, healthy, live joyously. May all individuals be safe, happy, healthy, live joyously. May all beings in existence be safe, happy, healthy, and live joyously. May I be safe from harm. May I be happy just as I am. May I be peaceful with whatever is happening. May I be healthy and strong. May I care for myself in this ever-changing world, graciously, joyously. May all beings in the air, on land, and in the water be safe, happy, healthy, and free from suffering. Okay, so now I'm going to read you chapter 21. It's 10 pages. We'll go as fast as we can. For those of you who with books, you can read along. For those of you without, just listen to my voice. So it's page 246. From days before we went, I'd had in my mind this picture of me and Tommy standing in front of that door, working up the nerve to press the bell, then having to wait there with hearts thumping. The way it turned out, though, we got lucky and were spared that particular ordeal. You know how when a big event is about to happen in your life and you have all these expectations for how it's going to be, and then it turns out not being at all the way you had imagined? We deserved a bit of luck by then because the day hadn't been going well at all. That's one of your questions. The car had played up on the journey out, and we were an hour late for Tommy's tests. Then a mix-up at the clinic had meant Tommy having to redo 3 of the tests. This had left him feeling pretty woozy. So when we finally set off for Little Hampton towards the end of the afternoon, he began to feel carsick. And we had to keep stopping to let him walk it off. We finally arrived just before 6 o'clock. We parked the car behind the bingo hall, took out from the boot the sports bag containing Tommy's notebooks, then set off towards the town center. It had been a fine day, and though the shops were all closing, a lot of people were hanging about outside the pubs, talking and drinking. Tommy began to feel better the more we walked, until eventually he remembered how he'd had to miss lunch because of the tests and declared he'd have to eat before facing what was in front of us. So we were searching for some place to buy a takeaway sandwich when he suddenly grabbed my arm so hard I thought he was having some sort of attack. But then he said quietly into my ear, "That's her, Kath. Look, going past the hairdresser's." And sure enough, there she was, moving along the opposite pavement, dressed in her neat gray suit, just like the one she'd always worn. We set off after Madame at a reasonable distance, first through the pedestrian precinct, then along the near-deserted High Street. I think we were both reminded of that day we'd followed Ruth's Possible through another town, but this time things proved far simpler because pretty soon she'd lead us onto that long seafront street. Because the road was completely straight and because the setting sun was falling on it all the way down to the end, we found we could let Madame get quite a way ahead, till she wasn't more than a dot. And there, she'd still be no danger of losing her. In fact, we never even stopped hearing the echo of her heels, and the rhythmic thudding of Tommy's bag against his leg seemed to be a kind of answer. We went on like that for a long time, past the rows of identical houses. Then the houses on the opposite pavement ran out, areas of flat lawn appeared in their place, and you could see beyond the lawns the tops of the beach huts lining the seafront. The water itself wasn't visible, but you could tell it was there, just from the big sky and the seagull noises. But the houses on our side continued without a change, and after a while I said to Tommy, "It's not long now. See that bench over there? That's the one I sit on. The house is just over from it." Until I said this, Tommy had been pretty calm. But now something seemed to get into him, and he began to walk much faster, like he'd wanted to catch up with her. But now there was no one between Madame and us, and as Tommy and I kept closing the gap, I had to grab his arm to slow him down. I was all the time afraid she'd turn and look at us, but she didn't, and then she was going in through her little gateway. She paused at her door to find her keys in her handbag, and then there we were, standing by her gate, watching her. She still didn't turn, and I had an idea that she'd been aware of us all along and was deliberately ignoring us. I thought, too, that Tommy was about to shout something to her, and that it would be the wrong thing. That's why I called from the gate so quickly without hesitation. It was only a polite, "Excuse me," but she spun round like I'd thrown something at her, and as her gaze fell on us, a chill passed through me, much like the one I'd felt years ago that time we waylaid her outside the main house. Remember, like when she looked at them as though they were spiders? That might be some interesting proof to put in your argumentative essay. Just keep that in mind, the way that humans make the clones feel, right? So if you're arguing on whether cloning should be legal or not, you might want to consider the clone's feelings and how Ishiguro's writing about that in his novel. Her eyes were as cold and her face maybe outside the main house. Oh, sorry. Her eyes were as cold and her face maybe even more severe than I remembered. That's kind of like that. I don't know if she recognized us at that point, but without doubt she saw and decided in a second what we were. See, what we were, not who we were, right? So she's like referring to them as a thing. Because you could see her stiffen, as if a pair of large spiders were to crawl on her. Then suddenly, something changed in her expression. It didn't become warmer exactly, but that revulsion, that means like disgust, got put away somewhere, and she studied us as carefully, squinting in the setting sun. "Madame," I said, leaning over the gate, "we don't want to shock you or anything, but we were at Hailsham. I'm Kathy H., and maybe you remember, and this is Tommy D. We haven't come to give you any trouble." She came a few steps back towards us. "From Hailsham," she said, and a small smile actually went across her face. "Well, this is a surprise. If you aren't here to give me trouble, then why are you here?" She's from Belgium, so I'm doing a French accent. Suddenly Tommy said, "We have to talk with you. I've brought some things." And he raised his back. "Some things you might want for your gallery. We've got to talk to you." Madame went on standing there, hardly moving in the low sun, her head tilted, as though listening for some sound from the seafront. Then she smiled again through the smile, though the smile didn't seem to be for us, but just herself. "Very well, then. Come inside, and then we'll see what it is you wish to talk about." As we went in, I noticed the front door had colored glass panels, and once Tommy closed it behind us, everything got pretty dark. We were in a hallway so narrow you'd felt you'd be able to touch the walls on either side, just by stretching out your elbows. Madame had stopped in front of us and was standing still, her back to us again like she was listening. Peering past her, I saw that the hallway, narrow as it was, divided further. To the left was a staircase going upstairs, to the right an even narrower passage leading deeper into the house. Following Madame's example, I listened too, but there was only silence in the house. Then, maybe, from somewhere upstairs, there was a faint thump. That small noise seemed to signify something to her, because She now turned to us and, pointing to the darkness of the passage, said, "Go in there and wait for me. I'll be down shortly." She began to climb the stairs, then, seeing our hesitation, leaned over the banister and pointed again into the dark. "In there," she said, then vanished upstairs. Tommy and I wandered forward and found ourselves in what must have been the front room of the house. It was like a servant of some sort had got the place ready for the night time and then left. The curtains were closed, there were dim table lamps switched on. I could smell the old furniture, which was probably Victorian. The fireplace had been sealed off with a board, and where the fire would have been, there was a picture woven like a tapestry of a strange owl-like bird staring at you. Tommy touched my arm and pointed to a framed picture hanging in a corner over a little round table. "It's Hailsham," he whispered. We went up to it, but then I wasn't so sure. I could see it was a pretty nice watercolor, but the table lamp beneath it had a crooked shade covered with cobweb traces. Instead of lighting up the picture, it just put a shine over the murky glass, so you could hardly make it out at all. "It's the bit round the back of the duck pond," Tommy said. "What do you mean?" I whispered back. "There's no pond. It's just a bit of countryside." "No, the pond's behind you." Tommy seemed surprisingly irritated. "You must be able to remember. If you're round the back, with the pond behind you, and you're looking over towards North Playingfield—" He went silent again because we could hear voices somewhere in the house. It sounded like a man's voice, maybe coming from upstairs. Then we heard what was definitively Madame's voice coming down the stairs, saying, "Yes, you're right, quite right." We waited for Madame to come in, but her footsteps went past the door and to the back of the house. It flashed through my mind that she was going to prepare tea and scones and bring it all in a trolley, but then I decided that was rubbish, that she'd just as lightly forgotten about us, and now she'd suddenly remember, come in, and tell us to leave. Then a gruff male voice called something from upstairs, so muffled it might have been 2 floors up. Madame's footsteps came back into the hallway. Then she called, "I've told you what to do, just do as I explained." Tommy and I waited several minutes. Then the wall at the back of the room began to move. I saw almost immediately it wasn't really a wall, but a pair of sliding doors, which you could use to section off the front half of what was otherwise one long room. Madame had rolled back the doors, just part of the way, and she was now standing there staring at us. I tried to see past her, but it was just darkness. I thought maybe she was waiting for us to explain why we were there, but in the end she said, "You told me you are Kathy H. and Tommy D., am I correct? And you were at Hailsham how long ago?" I told her, but there was no way of telling if she remembered us or not. She just went on standing there at the threshold as though hesitating to come in. But now Tommy spoke again. "We don't want to keep you long, but there's something we have to talk to you about." "So you say. Well then, you better make yourselves comfortable." She reached out and put her hands on the back of 2 matching armchairs just in front of her. There was something odd about her manner, like she hadn't really invited us to sit down. I felt that if we did, as she was suggesting, and sat on those chairs, she'd just go on standing behind us, not even taking her hands away from the backs. But when we made a move towards her, she too came forwards, and perhaps I imagined it tuck her shoulders in slightly as she passed between us. When we turned to sit down, she was over by the windows in front of the heavy velvet curtains, holding us in a glare like we were in a class and she was a teacher. At least that's the way it looked to me at the moment. Tommy afterwards said he thought that she was about to burst into song and that those curtains behind her would open, and instead of the street and the flat grassy expanse leading to the seafront, there'd be this big stage set like the ones we'd had at Hailsham, with even a chorus line to back her up. That's a really interesting analogy because, well, first of all, this reminds me of 2 things. So, you know, the curtain that was kind of leading to the back room, it's almost like, so we know that something's going to come out of that curtain. If any one of you are familiar with the Wizard of Oz story, and how the Wizard of Oz, when they finally get to the land of Oz, they're waiting for the wizard to make all their dreams come true. And yeah, it's kind of sad, right? The wizard just tells them to believe in themselves, pretty much. But now, the way the writer is describing this whole situation, he's referring to it as a stage. Like, she imagines it's like a play. So it's almost like Madame is putting on this act. It was funny when he said that afterwards, and I could see her again then, hands clasped, elbows out, sure enough like she was getting ready to sing. But I doubt if Tommy was really thinking anyway like that at the time. I remember noticing how tense he'd got and worrying he'd blurt out something completely daft. That was why, when she asked us, not kindly, what it was we wanted, I stepped in quickly. It probably came out pretty muffled at first, but after a while, as I became more confident she'd hear me out, I calmed down and got a lot clearer. I'd been turning over in my mind for weeks and weeks just what I'd say to her. I'd gone over it during those long car journeys and while sitting at quiet tables in service station cafes. It had seemed so difficult then, and I'd eventually resorted to a plan. I'd memorized word for word a few key lines and then drawn a mental map of how I'd go from one point to the next. But now she was there in front of me. Most of what I'd prepared seemed either unnecessary or completely wrong. The strange thing was, and Tommy agreed when we discussed it afterwards, although at Hailsham she'd been like this hostile stranger from the outside, now that we were facing her again, even though she hadn't said or done anything to suggest any warmth towards us, Madame now appeared to me like an like an intimate, someone much closer to us than anyone we'd ever met over the recent years. That's why suddenly all the things I'd been preparing in my head just now, and I spoke to her honestly and simply, almost as I might have done years ago to a guardian. I told her what we'd heard, the rumors about Hailsham and the students and deferrals, how we realized the rumors might not be accurate, and that we were banking on anything. And even if it is true, I said, we know you must get tired of all these couples coming to you claiming to be in love. Tommy and me, we never would have had come and bothered you if we weren't really sure. Sure. It was the first time she'd spoken for ages, and we both jolted back, a bit in surprise. You say you're sure? Sure that you're in love? How can you know it? You think love is so simple? So you are in love. Deeply in love. Is this what you are trying to tell me? Her voice sounded almost sarcastic, but then I saw with a kind of shock little tears in her eyes as she looked from one to the other of us. Remember, she also cried. When did she also cry? When Kathy was dancing to her Judy Bridgewater tape and clutching that pillow as though, she imagined that it was her mom who gave her up as a child and never wanted to let her go. And Madame, seeing that, felt really sad that she never had, like, a true adult figure to love her. You believe this, that you're deeply in love, and therefore you've come to tell me this? For this deferral? Why? Why did you come to tell me? She'd asked this in a certain way, like the whole idea was completely crazy, and then I'm sure I'd have felt pretty devastated. But she hadn't quite said it like that. She asked it almost like it was a test question she knew the answer to, as if even when she'd taken the other couples through an identical routine many times before. That was what kept me hopeful. But Tommy must have gotten anxious because he suddenly burst in. We came to see you because of your gallery. We think we know what your gallery is for. My gallery? She leaned back on the window ledge, causing the curtains to sway behind her, and took a slow breath. My gallery. Oh, you must mean my collection. All those paintings, poems, all those things of yours I gathered over the years. It was hard work for me, but I believed in it, as we all did in those days. So you think you know what it was for, why we did it? Well, that would be most interesting to hear, because I have to say, it's a question I ask myself all the time. She suddenly switched her gaze from Tommy to me. Do I go too far? She asked. I didn't know what to say, so I just replied, no. I go too far, she said. I'm sorry. I often go too far on this subject. Forget what I just said. Young man, you're going to tell me about my gallery. Please, let me hear. Well, it's so you could tell, Tommy said. So you'd have something to go on. Otherwise, how would you know when students came to you and said they were in love? Madame's gaze had drifted over to me again, but I had the feeling that she was staring at something on my arm. I actually looked down to see if there was bird shit or something on my sleeve. Then I heard her say, and this is why you think I gathered all of those things of yours? My gallery, as all of you always called it. I laughed. When I first heard that's what you were calling it, but in time I too came to think of it as that. My gallery. Now, why, young man, explain to me, why would my gallery help in telling which of you were really in love? Because it would help show you what we were like, Tommy said. Because of course, Madame cut in suddenly. Your art will reveal your inner selves. That's it, isn't it? Because your art will display your souls. Then suddenly she turned to me again and said, did I go too far? She'd said this before, and again I had the impression she was staring at a spot on my sleeve. But by this point, a faint suspicion I'd had ever since the first time she asked I go too far had started to grow. I looked at Madame carefully, but she seemed to sense my scrutiny, and she turned back to Tommy. All right, she said. Let us continue. What was it you were telling me? The trouble is, Tommy said, I was a bit mixed up in those days. You were saying something about your art, how art bears the soul of the artiste? Well, what I'm trying to say, Tommy persisted, is that I was so mixed up in those days I didn't really do any art. I didn't do anything. I know now I should have done, but I was mixed up, so you haven't got anything of mine in your gallery. I know that's my fault, and I know it's probably way too late, but I've brought some things here with me now. He raised his bag, then began to unzip it. Some of it was done recently, but some of it's from quite a long time ago. You should have Kath's stuff already. She got plenty into the gallery, didn't you, Kath? For a moment they were both looking at me. Then Madame said, barely audibly, Poor creatures, what did we do to you? With all our schemes and plans. She let that hang. And I thought I could see tears in her eyes again. Then she turned to me and asked, Do we continue with this talk? You wish to go on? It was then that she said this. The whole vague idea I'd had before became something more substantial. Do I go too far, and now do we continue? I realized with a little chill that these questions had never been for me or for Tommy, but for someone else. Someone listening behind us in the darkened half of the room. Ooh, it's kind of creepy. I turned round quite slowly and looked into the darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I heard a sound, a mechanical one, surprisingly far away. The house seemed to go much further back into the dark than I'd guessed. Then I could make out a shape moving towards us, and a woman's voice said, Yes, Marie-Claude. Let us carry on. Who do you think it is, guys? Who's behind that curtain? I was still looking into the darkness when I heard Madame let out a kind of snort. And she came striding past us and on into the dark. Then there were more mechanical sounds, and Madame emerged pushing a figure on a wheelchair. Oh. She passed between us again. I didn't mean that, like, being on a wheelchair is scary. I didn't mean that. I'm just anticipating who's to come into the room, chickens. Who do you think it is? She passed between us again, and for a moment longer, because Madame's back was blocking the view, I couldn't see the person in the wheelchair. Ooh, suspense! The writer's creating suspense, building tension. But then, Madame steered it around to face us and said, You speak to them. It's you they've come to speak to. I suppose 'tis. The figure in the wheelchair was frail and contorted, and it was the voice, more than anything, that helped me recognize her. So she no longer looks the way she once did, which is maybe the writer's hinting at this character is also broken and shut down as Hailsham was. Because now we're going to find out why Hailsham was broken down. The figure in the wheelchair was frail and contorted, and it was the voice more than anything that helped me recognize her. Miss Emily, Tommy said, quite softly. You speak to them, Madame said, as though washing her hands of everything. But she remained standing behind the wheelchair. her eyes blazing towards us. And then that's where the chapter ends, chicken. Stay tuned. Chapter 22. Okay, have a really good weekend, and don't forget to keep up with your work. You're all doing so well, okay? And keep posting to that discussion page. We love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments, concerns. All right, you can post videos of yourself as well. Yeah, just keep in touch, okay? Let me know what's going on. All right, bye.